Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of All in All with Alex. I'm your host, of course, Alex. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Anthony. How you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you. Thank you, Alex, for having me on.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. Glad to have you on. So, can you tell a little people? Can you give the people a little bit of background about yourself, and then we'll dive into the questions?
For 27 years, I sat as a judge on the Superior Court of California in L.A. County, and I still sit there part-time, although I'm technically retired. I'm a fellow at Harvard University's Advanced Leadership Initiative. I'm one of the managing editors of their Social Impact Review, and I practiced law for a good, 16, 17 years. Grew up in Los Angeles, other than a year in Europe and college and law school back east. I'm a California boy.
Okay, all right. Sounds like a pretty fun life there. So let's jump into it. So you served as a judge for 26 years, going on 27 for the Superior Court of California. What motivated you to pursue a career in law and eventually become a judge?
Well, law was kind of by default. I debated in high school. I was one of the editors of the school paper, co-editor in chief actually, and then in college I was managing editor of our newspaper there. And everybody used to say, "Hey, you speak well and you like to write. You ought to be a lawyer." And I didn't know any lawyers. There were no lawyers in our family. I was the first to go to college actually, but everybody kept saying, "You ought to be a lawyer." So I just sort of backed into it and applied to law school. I thought about journalism school. The applications took a long time to fill out. And so I sent the law school applications in first because they were easy. Before I could get the first journalism school application out the door, I got an acceptance from a law school. And so I figured, okay, I'll go to law school. Journalism can wait. And that's how it happened.
Okay. So do you ever regret not waiting and actually seeing what the journalist school had to offer?
There are times. Yes, there are times. You always wonder at 3 o'clock in the morning, especially as you get older and older, what if the road not taken? What if I had to do it all over again? And then I think the dark thoughts, oh, I would have been sued for libel. I would have been fired off the newspaper for getting my facts off mixed up. On the other hand, maybe I would have won the Pulitzer Prize. You never know. But I'm glad I became a lawyer because I'm glad I became a judge. I wasn't that fond of practicing law. I did it, and fortunately, I was able to become a judge, which was a fabulous profession, a fabulous career, because you're not just servicing clients that you may or may not respect. You're not just arguing for one side. You're above the fray, trying to be fair, trying to figure out what is the right result here based on the law, based on the facts.
So as a judge on the Court of Appeal, I mean, as far as anything that you could talk about, what were some of the most memorable cases you've encountered, and how?
You mentioned Court of Appeal. I was never a judge on the Court of Appeal, although I sat there twice as what we call a judge pro tem. In other words, sitting on loan to the Court of Appeal. You're asking what are some of my most significant cases on either court, is that correct?
Yes, and like how did it impact you personally?
Well, there were several. One which is over with, and I can talk about it to some degree. It's a very serious personal injury case. It was a star football player from UCLA who lost his leg in a motorcycle accident. And there was a question about the design of the intersection. And the jury did the right thing. They awarded him $35 million. But it was really, an upsetting trial. He was a great guy, still is. And, here he is in the prime of life. He had just met, quote unquote, the girl of his dreams. And they were very serious. They've been seeing each other for, 2 months or something like that when the accident happened. And it was really too late for them to get through it. She ultimately left him. She came to court and testified. And I'll never forget when she was sitting there, so well composed in court, so elegant in her presentation. And she said, "This wasn't the relationship I signed up for." And, that hit me. That hit me. At the time I was single. This was, I think, 2009, if I'm not mistaken. I, was involved with somebody, living with her, and we ultimately did get married 4 years later. But it really struck me. And, I kind of thought, okay, there, but for the grace of God go I. And I listened to the case, and, as I said, the jury did the right thing. Sitting on the Court of Appeal, I had a criminal appeal involving 2 defendants, 3 murders, 4 counts of attempted murder. It was a gang case, and they were trying to get revenge for some gang shootings on the other side, and they just went out and willy-nilly shot and killed 3 people, including a 12-year-old boy in front of his mother. The trial judge, after the jury convicted, the trial judge sentenced them both to life plus 140 years. And I heard the appeal. It took about 4 months for me to work my way through the transcript. Ultimately, I affirmed it and affirmed the prison sentence. But looking at this and reading it, I thought, wow, it's such a different world from what I grew up in. I was pretty fortunate to have good parents, live in a good neighborhood that was safe at the time, and not have to put up with this and not be that 12-year-old kid who was walking home and coming up the driveway to his waiting mother and get shot and killed.
Yeah, that's sad. Can you tell us about your experience as a fellow at the Advanced Leadership Initiative at Harvard? How did this opportunity shape your post judicial journey?
Well, what happened was, COVID came along, and I had not planned to retire. I figured I'm going to stay as long as it's fun, even though at 20 years you get a pension and you can leave and with that vested. But I kept thinking, look, if I like being a judge, I'm going to stick around. COVID comes, the courts shut down, and everything was done remotely once we revived. And that wasn't much fun. And on top of it, a very close friend of mine whom I clerked with went to Harvard, and he told me about this program. He himself had been a fellow in 2017. And so I looked into it, and it looked interesting. It's a program for people who really are in the 3rd chapter of their lives. They've retired, they're about to retire, but they want to do more than just sit around and write out crossword puzzles. They want to make a contribution still, or volunteer somewhere, or make a difference in some way. And so about 45 people are accepted into the program, and I applied, and I was accepted. And again, as I said, because of the acceptance and because COVID was still rampant, this was 2020, I decided to retire and to go into the program, which was very, very stimulating. You spend a year at Harvard. For us, it was virtual because of the pandemic. The first semester was completely virtual, which was great. I didn't have to go through a winter in Cambridge. I could sit here at home where I am right now, audit classes, go through our program twice a week. We would have various classes aimed at social impact and what it's all about. One class, they taught us about systems thinking, taught us about writing op-eds. Another talked about education, the problems there. Another talked, stories of movements and how movements begin and which movements succeed and which ones fail. And the professors came from all the schools of Harvard, the public health school, the Kennedy School, the business school, education school, undergraduate. And, I left just feeling much broadened, beyond being a judge. One of the things that really hit me was, I was with people who by and large had careers of success. The majority either came from government or from business. And they said, look, I started a company. We went public. We doubled and tripled. And then I sold the company, started another company, and that one doubled and it sold. It was like one success after another. Well, as a judge, I was listening to failures all the time, especially in civil cases. We started the business, it failed. I think the defendant is the reason for the failure. The defendant says, no, I'm suing the plaintiff because he's the reason for us failing in business. And you have one dispute after another after another. That's why they're in court. And so for me to hear all these people talking about, if not an unbroken line of success, certainly the majority of their experience being successful was quite a change.
Okay. Your stories and essays have received multiple Pushcart Prize nominations. How did writing become such a significant part of your life, and what role has it played in your personal growth?
Well, again, working on school papers, you're right. And I always enjoyed the experience. When I became a judge, it really wasn't a good fit to write journalistically because you're writing articles, op-eds, and judges are not supposed to publish opinions about things that may come in front of them, issues that they may have to confront. So I got more involved with short story writing, and I'm not much of a fiction writer, but I turned to personal essays about topics that I could write about. And I did go to a couple of writing conferences, the Kenyon Review Conference, the Squaw Valley Writing Conference, now known as the Community of Writers, the Siren Land Conference, and met a lot of fellow writers. And it just really became part of my life. I really enjoyed doing it. And then when I retired, of course, I could do it much more. And that's, so I took some of the essays I'd written about my family and added to them. And that, of course, turned into my memoir, Every Other Weekend, Coming of Age with Two Different Dads.
So growing up in Beverly Hills during Hollywood's golden age,
Yeah.
how did that environment shape your understanding of fame, family, and identity?
Oh, yeah. You got 3 hours? I can tell it to you this way. First, I remember I grew up first in Sherman Oaks. I didn't move to Beverly Hills until my mother remarried. Dan, my stepdad, moved us to Beverly Hills because of the schools. They had an excellent school system, probably one of the best in the country and much better than the LA schools. So what struck me later in life as I look back was, as far as fame and celebrities, it really didn't make a difference. Kids are kids. We didn't have, quote, celebrities in the school. If a person was a well-known actor or actress, they generally were schooled on the set, not at Beverly Hills High School or some other high school. Some were, like, for example, Evelyn Rudy, and she I mentioned her in the book. She went to Hollywood High School, and I met her a couple of times. Never got to know her, although I, quote unquote, had a crush on her after I met her. But the majority of the people were educated on the set. What we had in our school were children of celebrities. Danny Kaye's daughter, Larry Bishop's son, Lee J. Cobb's daughter, many directors and producers' children, Delbert Mann's kids, Ted Polk's son. He was a director very well known for Planet of the Apes and a couple of other series like Peyton Place. And they were normal people. They were not full of themselves. They didn't walk around saying, hey, look at my father. In fact, many of us didn't really understand or realize who their parents were. There were so many offspring of children, of stars running around that we weren't aware of it. It was like goldfish in the bowl, not aware of the fact that they're in water. So it wasn't that significant until after graduation, after I went into college or got into summer jobs later on in life, and people started saying, wow, you're from Beverly Hills. You must know lots and lots of stars and movie stars and TV stars. And, I really had to rack my brain to think, who did I know? Because it wasn't anything we really reveled in or really thought about.
Okay. So what does it mean for children of divorced parents to live their lives every other weekend? How did this experience impact your worldview as a child and later as a parent?
Good question. It was just an effort to navigate the two families. They were very different. It was literally living in two different cultures. One weekend you're living in Guatemala, the next weekend you're living in Japan. It's that kind of thing. And you have to adapt. And I was, 11 years old to 18 years old. That's the period I'm really writing about. And, you're dealing with, or I dealt with, a father who was very open, very intellectual, talked about any subject under the sun. He was the life of any party. He told jokes. He was a womanizer. He was a liberal Democrat. He loved Adlai Stevenson, John Kennedy. He ended up working, stumping in California for Bobby Kennedy. He was at the Ambassador when Bobby was killed. On the other hand, my stepfather, Stan, was a very serious businessman. And, his belief was you have to work. My dad loved to play. Stan believed you have to work. Quote, children should not have so much fun, end quote. And he was a Republican all the way. He had lived in Michigan and helped launch Gerald Ford's career. And in California, he was a big supporter of Richard Nixon, very close with Nixon's insurance broker, because he was also Stan's insurance broker. And John Crable became ambassador to Finland. So it shows you how close Crable was to Nixon. Two different people. And it took kind of the attempt to, I don't want to say change personalities, but certainly light up two different points of your persona in each household. And looking back on it, it's almost ironic, but I would say to anybody who spends every second weekend with a different family, become a judge. You are getting experience in handling different points of view and appreciating different points of view. And that will serve you very well on the bench. And it served me very well on the bench because, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I'm hearing one side. They're telling me what a horrible person the other side is. But, there are two sides of the story. Let's hear what the other one has to say. And let's try to go a little deeper and figure out what the motivations are and what's making them tick and why couldn't they get along. What created this lawsuit, if you will.
Okay. Having had both a famous father and a powerful stepfather, how did that dynamic influence your relationships and career choices?
There was a person who wrote a review of my memoir. It was published in Hippocampus magazine, which is a very respected literary journal. And she wrote that if it had not been for my father, I never would have written Every Other Weekend. Had it not been for Stan, my stepfather, I never would have become a judge. And I think that was very true. She was very observant and perceptive when she wrote that. How did it impact me? I tried to be fair. When I wrote the memoir, I wasn't sure how it was going to come out. I didn't plan to savage either one, even though both fathers had very deep faults. But both were trying their best. And that's kind of the epiphany I had as I was writing the book. These were people who, despite their faults and despite some shortcomings that I really had trouble getting over, they really were trying their best.
Well, I guess that's all that matters, huh? They tried their best, and
Yeah.
That's all you really can do at the end of the day is do your best. And
exactly. Their intentions were as honorable as they could be. They wanted to do the best they could for me, raise me as well as they could, and by and large, I think they succeeded. My father, despite his womanizing, he brought me into one of his affairs. I write about that in the book. Despite a lot of the immaturities he displayed and a lot of his bad decisions, tried his best. Stan, despite his very, very strict attitudes, his belief in corporal punishment, and his series of very bad decisions, especially after the period I write about in the book, he made some terrible business decisions. He tried his best, and both of them were good people.
Okay. So what was it like growing up in the shadow of such influential figures? Like, how did you navigate the contrasting worlds of entertainment and business?
It was interesting. I really wasn't interested in becoming an actor. I wasn't that fascinated with my father's life until later on. At the beginning, he was just a father who would come and go, and more go than come. We weren't that together very much. He didn't do children very well until really about the age of 9 when the divorce occurred. And then he and I connected very much. But I did a couple of points want to be an actor. And to his credit, he said, fine. He wrote me into a TV series, an episode of his series. And I quickly found that I was bored as all get out and I couldn't act worth a you-know-what. After 17 takes of one scene, I finally got it down, said I never want to do this again. And when it played on TV, they took out the audio track and narrated over my lines because I really wasn't that genuine in what I was saying. Also because it was shot in Sweden and all the kids I was appearing with had accents and I didn't. But that was fine. I wasn't upset about that. And I didn't try to get into theater in high school. Beverly Hills High School's drama program was reserved for people who had true career interests. Richard Dreyfuss, Albert Brooks, folks like that. And as far as Stan went, it convinced me that I didn't want to be in business. He wanted me to. He wanted me to get involved in the family business. He wanted his own 2 children to be involved in the family business. None of us did so. We all went our separate ways on that. Although my stepsister is known for her practice as a go-to person, a consulting person for family businesses. So she took her childhood experiences and translated them into becoming a consultant for people who have family businesses. And maybe the question becomes, what are you going to do with the siblings? If one sibling wants to be involved, the other doesn't, but wants the income from the company. What do you do when a mother whose treasurer is starting to go downhill, maybe isn't managing the money too well, but doesn't want to give up the position? How do the children handle that? That's Leslie's forte. That's what she does.
Okay. It's always good to know somebody like that.
Right.
So, in your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges? What are some of the biggest challenges when dealing with opposing political views or different economic statuses within a family?
Within a family, you got to continue to respect them. Just because I'm for candidate A and you're for candidate B, that doesn't mean you are, we should demonize you or that you're not smart or that you don't know what you're talking about. You've got to respect both sides. You hope you can engage in a principled debate. The problem, of course, now is in the last few years, that's gone out the window. And so many, many families, mine included, have decided not to have political conversations at our reunions, such as Thanksgiving or Christmas. Politics is off the table, which is too bad because it used to be on the table. My stepdad and his sister used to have all sorts of debates, and it was sort of almost a tradition, a family tradition, because Aunt Betty was very liberal, extremely liberal. Stan, of course, quite conservative. And, he would defend Nixon. He would defend Ronald Reagan. And Aunt Betty would say, oh, Reagan's a war criminal. He doesn't care about anybody but himself and his rich buddies. And they would go at it, but they always loved each other. It was always with great respect. And we always enjoyed the discussions. That's not happening now, which I think is a real loss. It's a real loss that, many people in the family are not able to have those kind of discussions.
Yeah, I would agree. So, for parents considering divorce, what do you believe are the most important things to keep in mind when it comes to the well-being of children?
Okay. Job one, get the kid into therapy. You may think the child is handling it just fine, but the child may not be. There could be all sorts of things underground that you just don't know about. Get the kid into therapy. I wish that had been the case with me because I took it very badly and it had a very long-lasting effect. It may still, for all I know. But back then, if you went to a psychologist or psychiatrist, you were considered mentally ill, quote unquote, or quote crazy, end quote. I remember in high school there was one boy who did admit to me he was seeing a psychologist, and I thought, oh my God, he must be really sick or crazy. He wasn't. In fact, he was brilliant. He was talented. He ended up going to Harvard. Unfortunately, he died of AIDS. But Leland was anything but crazy. He was probably ahead of his time with his parents seeing a psychologist. So that to me is the first priority. The second priority, of course, is what most people who write about this will tell you, which is don't use the kid as a pawn. Don't run down the other parent to your child. Don't tell them how evil the other person is. That's not going to achieve anything.
Yeah, I agree. That's just, it's just not a good thing to do on top of that. It's just, what I mean? So from your time as a judge, what was the most surprising thing you learned about family law and its impact on children and families?
Well, I actually never sat in a family law assignment, which was fortunate. I never wanted to. I never practiced it as a lawyer. I never wanted to. I'm sure this is a fallout from the divorce. I just wanted nothing to do with family law. Now, had I been assigned it as a judge, as a new judge, yeah, I would have saluted and handled it the best I could. But the good news is the presiding judge never sent me into a family law courtroom. I handled, I think, one family law case as a trial judge and I think one or two on appeal when I sat pro tem on the Court of Appeal. And on the Court of Appeal, it's all intellectual. There's no emotion involved. You just look for what the law is, apply the law, figure out whether or not you need to affirm or reverse the judgment, and you move on. But I did have cases involving former spouses that emerged in the criminal courts or in the civil courts because they do spill over many times. I had one where both husband and wife were deaf and there had been a battery and each was suing the other for battery. And it was a very sad case. It really was. I mean, they just didn't understand what they were doing to themselves or to the kids. And I remember it was a jury trial at the end of the case. I think the jury ruled against the plaintiff. But, I sat there thinking, okay, this is going to bring up a few memories. The other areas where I got involved were domestic violence cases. And that's really, I think, to answer your question, what shocked me the most when I became a judge is the level of domestic violence I saw. And it's not limited to any one group, any one race, any one socioeconomic status. It cuts right across everything. And it's very sad. It's really sad to see what happens when someone beats up their spouse. And it's generally the man beating up the woman. I had one where it was the woman beating up the man, but that's extremely rare. But it's sad. I mean, if anything was going to bring a tear to my eye, those cases did it.
Right. Yeah, I can only imagine being involved in that. That's, it's just insane. So how do you think your role as a judge can impact the broader legal system, especially in terms of creating lasting social change?
Lasting social justice, did you say? Your audio went down.
Yes. How do you think the role of a judge can impact the broader legal system, especially in terms of creating lasting social change?
Well, a trial judge can only really deal with the people in front, of him or her. And you try to be fair. Maybe you're going to make a difference. You'll certainly make a difference to the people in front of you, but you're really not impacting, lasting social change unless you are on the Court of Appeal or even more likely on the Supreme Court. That's where you're impacting lasting social change. But if you have a case that you think is going to go up on appeal or maybe even reach the Supreme Court, you do your best. Look at the law, try to apply the law as best you can, reach the result that you think is appropriate and fair, consistent with the law. And I had a few cases that made it to the California Supreme Court, nothing that made it to the U.S. Supreme Court. One they attempted to. It was a case involving labeling farm-raised salmon. And I made one ruling, which I thought was appropriate. The Court of Appeal affirmed me 3-0 and published the opinion. The California Supreme Court reversed the Court of Appeal 7-0, published their opinion. And then the other side tried to petition for cert. The U.S. Supreme Court denied it. But that had an impact. And I've had a couple of other cases which, once they went up on appeal, made contributions to the law. That's good. Makes you feel good if you've had a case that somehow or other is reflected in the reported cases, has a slight impact on the body of law. You're giving a little nudge to the universe, just a little teeny weeny nudge.
So, as a writer, what inspired you to start telling stories, and how has this medium served as a therapeutic or reflective tool for you over the years?
Well, I think any writing, especially memoir, is a form of cheap therapy. You write what you know, and when you're writing a memoir, you're interrogating yourself. You're telling on yourself. You're putting yourself out there on a stage, and you have to really think through what happened and why things occurred, what made you do what you did or not do what you didn't do. I think that's somewhat therapeutic. At least it was to me. As far as writing, and telling stories, I was telling stories as a child. I used to write cartoons. I'm a terrible artist. I got a D in art. My art teacher in the 7th grade yelled at me and said, "You and I are going to have trouble, young man." I always like to tell stories, and I'd write some comic books and the panels would tell a story. And so I guess I had it, my father told stories too. I guess that's where it came from. But as I said, fiction has never been my strongest point. I have written a few short stories. About 3 or 4 are published, and I'm proud of them. But it's more, for me, essays and nonfiction. And it does have an impact. It's nice to sit down and try to think through things and analyze an issue. Figure out, why did you do what you did, or why didn't you do what you did? How do you feel about it now? The older, wiser narrator looking back on something that happened, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
So, were there any challenges for you whenever you decided to share your personal stories in the essays publicly?
Sometimes I expected problems when my book came out because I didn't run it by the family members. Now, my father and stepfather were dead by then, but brother, sister, and my father's stepchildren, his 2 stepsons, they're still around. And I was wondering, how are they going to react? Now, I sort of dipped my toe in the water because a number of personal essays I had published, I put into the memoir. And so I had shared those, and I kind of knew what people thought of them. And by and large, the reactions were positive. And fortunately, I had positive reactions from the family for my book. My sister said it was much better written than I expected it to be. My stepbrother said the same thing. From my father's children, I'm not sure. They never mentioned it to me, probably because I wasn't that generous with their mother. I didn't savage her, but I told it as it was. The woman who came onto the scene and took my father away from my mother. And then their marriage was not good at all. In fact, it was poisonous at times. So I haven't really talked much about them to them. As far as short stories go, I did write one short story. I didn't think it was my best work. It was published. It actually got nominated for a Pushcart Prize, which surprised me because I think I could have done much better with it. But I remember one person read it and she really got angry with me. She said, "How could you write this? I'm so upset. I was up all night upset because of your story. I can't believe this. You made me so upset." And I'm sitting there going, good. That's what a writer's supposed to do. Impact the reader
Exactly.
one way or the other. Make the reader laugh, make the reader cry, make the reader angry, but that's what a writer is supposed to do. You write a script for a movie, that's what the movie is supposed to do. I don't care if the movie is The Sound of Music or Mississippi Burning. It's supposed to impact the viewer.
That's right. I agree. What role do you feel that mentorship or guidance from others played in your personal and professional life,
I'm going
especially
to
as
ask you to repeat that because the
oh,
audio again drops.
okay. What role did mentorship or guidance from others play in your personal and professional life?
Okay. Again, good question. Well, both fathers were mentors in their way. They both gave me good guidance. I don't mean to discount that. And I think I put that in the book. And my mother was the unsung hero of the book. And she gave me all sorts of guidance, unlimited guidance and mentorship all along, which I'm forever grateful for. And then there was school, because both households were new and different. I'm getting used to a stepfather, or I'm getting used to a stepmother. This is not the family that I was comfortable with all the way up to age 9 when they split. The school became the stable center of my world, and I was lucky to have some very good teachers who did serve as role models and did guide me along with many other classmates. And most of us from my high school are still in touch, and we still remember with fondness many of the teachers we had. In fact, I just got an email from my old English teacher this morning. And shortly before we came on here, I sent back a note to him.
Good. That's good. A lot of people, lose touch after, you deal with them for whatever time frame, you may not talk to them. Some people, you may not talk to them ever again in life. And then some people, it
So
may
true.
be 10, 15, 20 years later by the time you talk to some of them. And,
Yeah,
it's just, the way life works sometimes when you start getting families and things like that.
you're right, Alex. You're right.
So I guess the last question that I have for you, after your years of work in the legal and academic fields, what's next for you? Like, what future projects are you most excited about?
Good question again. Well, more writing because I enjoy it and I have more time to do it now. Still sit part-time on the bench, and actually I've been enjoying sitting in mental health court. I never did that when I was a full-time judge, but I decided I wanted to see what it was like. Periodically I now have sat on the mental health court, and you're doing the Lord's work. It's an area where we need help. We need judges to listen, to try to make good results, to try to understand the law. It's changing. In California, it's going to change severely next year. 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Court of Appeal just came down with a very significant decision about a person having a right to care in a hospital or an equivalent facility, because right now in LA, very often there's a shortage of beds, and they languish in the jail until a bed can be found, which could be weeks, months, sometimes a year. And this opinion says, no, that's not right. You've got to find a place one way or another, get the money together, whatever, but find a bed for this person in a reasonable time. So I've enjoyed that, and hopefully I'll continue there and also do some more traveling. I just got back from a month in Africa, which was really an eye-opener. I loved it.
Yeah, I always wanted to visit overseas. Well, anywhere overseas. I really never been. The farthest I've been is Puerto Rico. So
I like Puerto Rico. It's a great place. But
yeah, I
yeah,
didn't.
Alex, you got to go. You got to go farther.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. So I want to take this time out to tell you that I appreciate you. Thank you for coming on today, talking about your book, talking about your time as a judge, giving some of, the life lessons and things that you've learned over time, planting that over here with us so we can listen to it and learn from it as well. So I definitely appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much. I've enjoyed my time with you. Best of luck and have a good new year.
Yes, sir. Most definitely. Most definitely. So everybody that's out there watching, you all, go down to the description and you can find all of Anthony's information, how to get his books and his website or anything that he has to offer as well. So you guys make sure you go and do that. So everybody that's out there watching, you guys have just watched another episode of All in All with Alex, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Peace.
Okay. Bye now.